my name is Sebastian Wieczorek and I'm going to talk to you about how to use generative AI responsibly. For this, I will talk about what is generative AI for a second, then I'll show you a demo of how it's used in business applications, and then we will talk about ethical considerations of using AI and generative AI. So let me start by saying, you probably all know that AI is redefining the way organizations run their businesses, which spans from how you build your products, for example, in manufacturing, how you do your back-end or back-office processes in HR, in finance, and so on and so forth, and also how you engage with your customers via voice, chat, email, and so on and so forth. AI has been there for quite some time now in many of these interactions and processes. And with Gen AI, we're adding more capabilities to AI that is then infused in these processes. And what you can see here on these slides is you have AI around for quite some time already, starting from using statistical methods to analyze your data to, let's say, the predictive age, last decade, I would say, roundabout, where machine learning became prevalent and added more and more capabilities. And now we're starting to see that with the generative AI, we have even more capabilities. What you also see here is that these capabilities of Gen AI, they are not replacing what we have done in the past, but they are additive. That means that also statistics is not going away. We still have analytics applications. Machine learning and prediction tasks are still going to grow going forward, but we're adding generative AI capabilities as well to increase productivity of humans in these processes that I was describing. So what is generative AI? On the right hand, what you can see here is a simple learning task for a large language model called LLM here. And you see what the large language model in training does is basically predicting next words in a sentence. So if you see the sentence chicken lay, then obviously most people think they lay eggs. So eggs would be the goal of the training for the large language model. And when they are tired at night, chickens lie down. So what basically is happening is that a large language model during training is shown a lot of these texts with some blank spaces, and then the model is trying to predict the right word that goes into the blank space. If it guesses right, then it gets a reward. If it guesses wrong, it's adjusted in another direction. And so it's adjusting more and more in order to predict the right next words. And that's done on billions of words. It can also be done when it's not large language models. It can be done on images, can be done on video, and so on and so forth. And what you can see is that because it's so easy to create this training, this can be done automatically. So all you need is a large corpora of text, and then you automatically take out words and let the large language model guess these words. That's why it's called self-supervised learning. The system can basically supervise itself in learning how to fill these blanks. Now, when we create a terminology around what I have just described on the training side, there are foundation models that are basically using this self-supervised learning, and they're trained on large volumes of data. Large language models, they are a subset of or a subcategory of foundation models that are using text. Other instances of foundation models would be models that are predicting parts in an image, or predicting the next frame in a video, or predicting the next second in an audio file. Then you have generative AI, and most of generative AI is provided by foundation models, but there are other methods as well that are producing output. But most dominantly and most talked about is generative AI methods that are fueled by foundation models. And ChatGPT is then one application that is built on large language models. Now, why are foundation models so cool? What you can see is they can take in a lot of different data types: text, image, speech, structured data, meaning tabular data, for example. They use they use this for training, and then they can do a lot of different tasks on their own. And this is really cool because non-technical users are now able to describe in natural language what they want the model to do, and the model can solve these tasks out of the box. Of course, you can do adaptations with prompt engineering, with embeddings and fine-tunings. I'm just mentioning it. If you want to know more, maybe you can ask a question later. We have a Q&A section. But basically, the model you can use as is in order to provide a lot of different capabilities like text summarization, like text generation, like question answering or code generation, and a ton more of capabilities that these are examples here for large language models that you can do with one single large language model. And you know that because you're using ChatGPT and other provided large language model access. SAP is using large language models and other foundation models all across their business. Here I'm showing you the announcements that we made at Sapphire. Tomorrow you will learn more about the cool and new stuff that we're providing that is going to be announced at TechEd. Today is on technology. That's why I don't want to foreshadow what is going to be shown tomorrow. But you see here that we're embedding foundation model or generative AI capabilities all over the place. These are the blue ones, as well as traditional AI methods that are also getting embedded as product features. And we're doing that with a clear vision of how we want to evolve the way humans are interacting with enterprise systems, from basically moving the user from executing tasks to humans supervising tasks. So basically a human not anymore clicking on things, not anymore doing the legworks or the maths, but human describing what the system should be doing. And that's basically what AI helps us with. It can do more and more autonomous activities in order to provide services to humans that then supervise what the AI system is doing. And therefore we increase productivity and the value of human labor. Now let's look at the concrete example. Here what you can see is we have created a job requisition in SuccessFactors, and what people then do usually is they want to provide the details and create it as a job posting. And what you see here is a user clicking on the generate button, and then you're seeing here now that a job posting is created automatically. You can accept it and open it in Word in order to fine-tune it, to adjust it in case there's some information wrong or missing, or you want to change the structure or something like that. Simple as is. And I would say from a perspective of a user, it's super cool that you don't have to provide the prompt, you don't have to copy over something to your LLM provider like ChatGPT, ask a question, but automatically by click of a button, this text generation in a meaningful place is taking place. Now, when we talk about AI ethics, what are considerations that you have to take in order to embed AI in this way? There are multiple considerations that we are looking at, or that we take serious at SAP. Transparency and explainability, addressing bias and discrimination, human agency and oversight, and civic society are the headlines of that are describing the functions or the requirements that we have for how we want to embed AI in an ethical and responsible manner. And if we take this job posting generation as an example, we see that when the user is interacting with the system, there's a full transparency that AI has been used in order to generate the job posting. And you also saw on the screen that there is information about what were the data points that were used in order to derive the output. There's We take care about addressing bias and discrimination by avoiding the use of personal data. If you're generating a job posting, obviously no personal data is needed. There's information needed about what this job is about, what location it is, what seniority you're looking for, but not who has been writing it or who is a good candidate for it. And of course, we're constantly testing for biases, inaccuracies, and errors in the outputs that we're getting. There's when we talk about human agency and oversight, you have been seeing that there is full editing capabilities, so the user has full control about the content that is created, can change it, can also get this into Word in order to do editing on the formats. And of course, and that's clear, I guess, the user also has the final decision on whether the job posting goes out that way. It's not an AI that is taking that decision. And when we talk about civic society, of course, when we look at these systems, we make sure that they cannot be used for different purposes than what we intended. So, for example, this job posting generation is not supporting any form of surveillance activities, not providing you capabilities for doing that indirectly even. And it's also not set up for manipulating individuals or groups, for example. So what we do at SAP, these are basically considerations that we're doing, and we take that serious, going through all these considerations with all the AI capabilities that we're providing. And how are we doing it? We take very much pride at SAP in having general AI ethics guiding principles. You see them here on the left. I'm not going to read them all out, but if you follow the link, you get an explanation for all of these. I think it's important that SAP has these guiding principles and that we're standing by them. We have a governance body that consists of an AI ethics steering committee. These are senior executives all across the company, from legal, from marketing, from development, and so on and so forth, that are coming together to review and steer how we're doing AI ethics at SAP. We have external advisory panel that is supporting us in taking this decision, and we have a trustworthy AI work stream that is basically making sure that the execution of all these decisions is taking place. And we have a policy framework that allows us to define rules and regulations for these specific aspects that I mentioned. And in the example, I showed you what are some of these key requirements that we have for these categories, but of course there are more. And overall, what we see is that, of course, we want to build AI or infuse AI in a way that it's integrated in SAP products. So we're not building standalone AI technology, but our focus is on embedding AI capabilities in order to improve the performance, in order to improve the outcome and efficiency of human work, and to support the human in doing their tasks. We want to do that in a reliable way, robust, secure, according to compliance rules, and of course we want to do it in a responsible way. That's important for us, and I showed you how we set up as a company in order to achieve this, how we set up our processes, how we set up our guiding principles as a framework, and how we set up our policy as a standard means to enforce this. And just to mention that this AI ethics policy has been signed by all workers' councils worldwide, has been signed by the executive board, and is therefore binding to all employees at SAP. So every single employee is responsible for obeying to the AI ethics guiding principles and to the policy. And by being so rigorous in this process and being so clear about our expectation toward relevance, reliable, and responsible, we're making sure that we're delivering the best business results with business AI. And with that, I'm at the end of my talk, and would then move over to the question and answers.
Live Q&A.
Okay, so I'm seeing the first question and I'm going to read it out. How do you strike a balance between the creative capabilities of generative AI and the ethical responsibility of its outcomes? Yeah, that's a good question. I think in general, people understand that generative AI has the potential to provide a lot of let's say, content in a short time frame. And what we have to see is to use this in the most meaningful way. What I showed you is that the generative AI capabilities here in this example have been used to create a job posting based on the information that we are providing to the system. So we're safeguarding basically the outcomes by providing additional information that the user doesn't have to know about and doesn't have to influence. The user is just clicking a button. There are other forms of safeguarding, for example, by using grounding or by using meta prompting and other means. We're using that as well. And of course, as I said, in our guiding principles and in our policies, we're also defining that we have to check regularly that the means that we're creating are then also supporting what we want to do, and that the system is not doing something that we're not expecting. I hope that answered the question. Let me check another one. How are we assessing partner use cases in terms of who owns the accountability, us or the partners? Very good question. Yes, I think it's clear that the policy is applicable to SAP, but of course to everything that SAP is offering, it is applicable too. And that means if a partner is providing capabilities, AI-related capabilities as part of SAP's offering, then of course also the guiding principles and the policy is binding for the partner. That's basically the answer to that. Let me take the next question. What is the difference between a Gen AI high-risk use case and a standard Gen AI use case? Good question. I didn't talk much about the way we're determining what is a high-risk use case and a standard use case, but let me explain that here on this part. We distinguish between high-risk cases and standard cases by saying, okay, we have cases that are, let's say, from an ethical perspective, relatively clear where it's relatively clear what has to be done, and the risk of something going wrong and in terms of ethics is rather low. For example, if you're doing automated detection of whether machine parts need maintenance or not, from an ethical perspective, this is a low-risk use case because humans are not directly, or in most cases, humans are not directly affected by it. The outcome is basically has to do with business impact, but not with human rights or with other ethics-related concepts. But then you have things like what I showed you, the Gen AI use case here in an HR-related field, where you could say, okay, maybe there's discrimination in how we're generating the job posting, or there's discrimination in other parts of the process, or there's a question of autonomy involved in that. So basically, these two categories of use cases are existing, and we have a 5-question approach. So we're asking questions like, is personal data used in this use case? Is it an HR-related use case or another sensitive field where the use case is deployed, and other questions that we're asking? And if we answer that yes in 2 times, then it's a high-risk use case. And now, long story short answer, Gen AI use cases are basically high-risk use case in the same sense as other use cases. So there's no specific question about Gen AI. It is basically a high risk that personal information, or if personal information is processed, if the outcome is affecting humans, these are relevant questions. At the same time, at the moment at SAP, we are looking at Gen AI cases as if they were high-risk use cases for a simple reason. We want to update our AI ethics policy to better represent the specifics of Gen AI, and therefore, until we updated it and also got the sign-off then from all the workers' councils and from our executive board, we need to make sure that that we're catching all these corner cases as well, and that's why for the moment we're treating Gen AI use cases as high-risk cases in general. And what does it mean, treating high-risk cases different? The AI ethics policy applies to all use cases. That's what it is. But for high-risk use cases, we have a 4 eyes principle. So we have a second round of review of the AI ethics policy to make sure that also the details are well understood and the use cases are obeying to all parts of the policy in a meaningful way. And I think we have time for another question. Let me read it out. How Gen AI will transform business routines? Yes, good question. So, in my opinion, what you have seen is that Gen AI has been used in the demo for generating text, and I think that's what it can do. Everybody understands how that is working. Is basically, and here what the difference is between me interacting with a system like ChatGPT, and what we've seen is that actually it was not me interacting with the large language model, but the system generated the prompt, so the input to the large language model, and the output was going back to the system. So it's basically system to large language model interaction. That's the embedded capabilities that we're having. But the interesting thing, I didn't show that here, but there are also use cases where you can use the large language model to generate code, for example. So the large language model indirectly can create behavior, or you can use a large language model to create API calls, so interact with systems directly via the backend capabilities. And if you use these capabilities, basically you can ask a large language model or an AI system that you're sitting in front of to fulfill a task, and this now can be a task that is not just I generate a text. You have seen that this is working, but it could well be fetch me the information from this system and summarize it for me, and then the LLM can generate an API call that then gets executed in the backend. The backend is providing the relevant information that is needed in order to answer your query, and the LLM is used again in order to generate the answer. And what you can do with the system, we call it agents. What you can do in an agent-based Gen AI system is you can automate the interaction between user and system, and I think that's going to be the future. We will see more and more agents in the system that are going off to complete combined and complex tasks and come back with the information that we as users requested, or come back with the information that the task has been completed and in what form it has been completed. And I think that's when generative AI will play its major role, and when even more efficiency gain will be possible. And I think with that, let me close the call. Thanks a lot for tuning in and having so much interest in the topic of generative AI and responsible AI. I hope you have a great TechEd. That's it from my side. Thanks a lot.